Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. My name is Tyler Simmons, and today I want to take you through how realist evaluation can support our place-based working across Essex. So I want to show you how this way of working and this way of thinking can help us understand the complexity in our places, make sense of the variations that we all see, and also turn evaluation into something that feels practical, accessible, and genuinely helpful. And I do just want to point out that this isn't a technical workshop. It's not about how we do realist evaluation. It's more about the amazing things that we can do with it, hopefully sparking some ideas that you can use and take away into your own work. So first, I thought it was best to sort of give a quick overview of who I am and my links to realist evaluation. So I'm an evaluation researcher with Active Essex. I've been in post for about 8 months now. And we use realist evaluation within our place-based working to evidence and develop our best pictures of how change happens across Essex and also our theories of change. However, before that, I was finishing my PhD, which looked at sport and exercise-based interventions in alternative provisions, which fully utilized realist evaluation methodology from start to finish. So I would describe and also have been described as someone who is realist to the core. However, I am also super keen on making complex methods like this accessible and usable to every single person, regardless of training or experience. So, as I was saying, I've heard from the amazing Sarah Stokes, which I've subsequently adopted as my own, is that evaluation is and should be everybody's business, and I feel like realist evaluation very much fits that. So, what's the context of today's session? Well, first, I want to begin by grounding us in the reality of Essex. When we talk about place-based working, we often frame it as a single idea, but Essex isn't a single system. It's a patchwork of locations, cultures, communities, infrastructures that all function really differently. The work we do in Basildon, for example, will never look identical or even similar sometimes to the work that we do in Tendring or Harlow or Castle Point. And the pressures that are also witnessed and felt are different. The partners are different. The local histories are different. The relationships are different. And what that means is that change will always happen in a different way, which is completely natural. So traditional evaluation tends to flatten all of this. It tends to ask one question of, did it work? When you're dealing with the highly varied and dynamic systems that we've just discussed, that question is too blunt. It gives you an answer, but it doesn't necessarily give you the understanding. So this is where realist evaluation offers something really powerful, and it asks four connected questions. What works, for whom, in what context, and why? So these questions help us understand the deeper story behind the outcomes. Once you understand the story, you can make better decisions, you can design stronger interventions, and you can also build more transferable learning. Today, I want to take you through four amazing things that realist evaluation can help us do. So let's start with the first one. So section one is going to look at the fact that you can explain why things work or don't. So this is the heart of realist evaluation. This idea comes from the work of Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley, who argued that outcomes do not simply appear. Outcomes are produced by mechanisms. Mechanisms are the underlying processes that explain why a change happens. And I guess you can kind of think of a mechanism as the ingredients that go into baking a cake or going to creating an outcome. So mechanism is not the intervention itself, but in fact broken down into three elements. The first two, so resources and strategy, are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend too much time on those. But the third one is response. So what I mean by that is that the intervention or the project or the program creates a response in the people who are participating in it. So this is important because risk evaluation is not asking whether an activity was delivered correctly, but it's asking what human process has been triggered by the activity. So for example, confidence is a mechanism, feeling safe is a mechanism, feeling valued is a mechanism, and feeling part of something bigger is also a mechanism. And then I guess on the slightly negative side, feeling judged is also a mechanism. So behavior is shaped by these inner responses, which then creates an outcome. So I guess let me bring this to life with an Active Essex example. So a girls' football program thrived in one place because trusted female coaches created a safe relational environment. The mechanism here was safety. And so once safety was triggered, participation increased, commitment grew, and outcomes followed. In another place, the same exact program struggled because parents were quite anxious about allowing their children to travel to the sessions. So the mechanism here, or the response, was worry, which blocked engagement. So the program itself hadn't changed, but the response or the mechanism had. So this is one of the most powerful elements of realist evaluation because it prevents us from saying only that the program worked here, but did not work there. What it does do is it helps us understand what made it work here, but why it didn't work here. So when you understand these mechanisms, I guess you understand the levers that are being pulled, which are actually creating the change that we're hoping to see. So I guess as you're listening to that, try to have a think about the projects that you're working on or aware of, and ask yourself, so what was the real reason that it succeeded? And you're not looking for the activity, you're looking for the inner response that the activity created. And that response is a big element of the mechanism. So section 2 is you can show how context shapes outcomes. So if mechanisms explain why something works, context explains the settings in which the mechanisms does or does not fire. So Pawson used a simple idea that mechanisms are only activated in the right context. If the context is not supportive, even the best designed mechanisms or interventions will fail. So context includes infrastructure, relationships between partners, local cultures, leadership behaviors, transport availability, community norms, and countless other factors. So again, let me give another example. So in Basildon, where sort of transport is really strong, the context made a mechanism of opportunity possible within a free sports session because it allowed travel to be accessible. And young people could physically reach the session so that the program was accessible. However, in tendering, transport barriers prevented people from getting to the sessions, so the mechanism of opportunity was never triggered. And the solution was not to abandon the program, but instead the hub sort of partnered with bus companies to reshape the context. And so once the context changed, the mechanisms fired and outcomes improved. So the theoretical idea here is straightforward. The outcomes result from the interaction between context and mechanisms. You can't isolate one from the other. Context shapes the way people react. It shapes whether they trust something, whether they feel included, whether they can attend, whether they feel safe, and also whether they see value. So for me, context is absolutely king. I think understanding context can help us explain and identify the major or minor differences that could mean the difference between a project or a program working or not. So many research methodologies do not place that much emphasis on context, which isn't a knock against them, but it definitely is a big green tick for realist evaluation. And it's also super essential for place-based working as well. And as also local authority worker, because taking Essex as an example, there are so many different towns and cities which all have vastly different resources and structures. So being able to understand them can really boost our ability and capabilities to create programs and activities and projects that really work. So again, I guess another little prompt for you to sort of sit there and have a think about. So what context in your area helps your work and which ones hinder it? Okay, so section 3. So you can generate practical and real-time learning. So this is where realist evaluation moves away from being a research method towards being a live problem-solving tool. Realist thinking is not something you can save until the end of a project. It's a way of noticing patterns as they appear, and you can adjust your approach while the working is happening. It is a cyclical process, a journey in a way, if I had to find I guess, a slightly cliche way of describing it. And in theory, this relates to what Porson called generative causation, which simply means outcomes are generated step by step. And the only reason I mention that is if you see it in sort of literature or anything like that. So they're not fixed, basically. They can change as conditions change. That means we can intervene sort of mid-journey or mid-program. We can interrupt mechanisms that are hindering progress. We can strengthen mechanisms that are supporting it. So let me bring in another example of a holiday hunger club. So attendance was low. And if the team had used a traditional evaluation mindset, they might have concluded that the activity was really unpopular or ineffective. But instead, realist thinking encouraged us to sort of have a think and ask sort of what is going on beneath the surface. So they discovered that the mechanism of stigma. So families did not want to be seen as needing support, and so that mechanism was blocking the engagement. The team then reframed the program as a family fun day with food, and the mechanism changed from stigma to belonging, and we saw effectively attendance triple. So this is realist evaluation at work in action. It's not a box to tick, it's a learning tool that helps us refine our approaches to whatever we're trying to achieve. Further examples of how we use realist evaluation in real time is the recent action plans that I've been developing with the places, aiming at helping them mature in areas to see as a priority. So action plans are realist evaluation inspired ideas. They're essentially explanatory statements that help explain how a system within a place can mature. And my focus on using realist evaluation here is inspired, I guess, to create tangible, impactful feedback loops that the places could understand and actually use. So this approach encourages places to move from identifying what needs to change towards understanding how and why change is likely to happen. And each statement is going to be refined sort of collaboratively through discussion, making sure that it's both realistic and also grounded in local evidence. So as learning is captured through practice, these statements can then be sort of revisited and adapted to reflect sort of what is actually happening on the ground. And again, this supports that cyclical notion of realist evaluation methodology. So again, another, I guess, reflective prompt for yourself. If you had realist insights into one of your projects or programs that you're currently working on or have recently worked on, what would you have changed and what would you change tomorrow if it's currently ongoing? Okay, so moving on to section 4. So this is where realist evaluation helps us build knowledge that travels beyond a single project or place. When you identify a mechanism, you can often link it to sort of wider social or psychological theories. So for example, when active travel pilots in Essex used community challenges to encourage cycling, the mechanism was social norm visibility. People were influenced when they saw other people taking part, and this aligns with behavior change theory, specifically the ideas that visible norms shape action. So what realist evaluation offers is a bridge between practical observations and also theoretical knowledge. So once you link a mechanism to a wider theory, your learning becomes transferable. It's not just an insight, it's a human insight that can be used and translated across Essex. So the best part is that you don't need academic language to do this. Think of belonging, pride, identity, trust, motivation. There are mechanisms that connect to theories of social learning, identity formation, autonomy, and also community cohesion. So in essence, when you see something working, ask yourself which human idea sits underneath it. That idea often connects to a wider theory or an even academic theory as well. So again, a final reflection prompt. So what simple ideas or theories do you think sit underneath some of the success of the projects that you're currently working on or previously have worked on? So Essex is a complex system. Realist evaluation helps us make sense of that complexity without oversimplifying it and also without being overwhelmed by it. The theory behind realist evaluation gives us a structure, but also the language it uses can be translated to a practice that is both helpful and understandable on all levels of the system. So, for example, mechanisms become inner reason, context becomes the setting or the environment, outcomes become what change as a result, and evaluation becomes a learning process rather than a judgment that all of a sudden everyone is involved in and invested in. So the four ideas that we covered today form a practical toolkit. First, realist evaluation helps us explain the reasons behind success or failure. Second, it helps you understand the influence of local setting. Third, it gives you live insight that supports adaptation and improvement. And fourth, it links local learning to wider theories, so knowledge becomes transferable. So when you begin to think in this way, you no longer ask only whether something works. You naturally begin asking why it works, for whom it works, and what needs to be in place for it to work again. So this is what transforms evaluation from that static process into a more dynamic process. So next steps. I really do encourage you to start using realist questions in everyday discussions. You can do this without any technical language, asking yourself what worked, for whom, in what context, and why. That single question line will change how you understand your work. I genuinely promise that. So we will also be running a technical workshop where we will explore the practical tools of realist evaluation. So how to build those simple realist evaluation output statements, and also how to embed this way of working into sort of your own planning and delivery. I'm not sure when it will be yet, but I do know it will be called Getting Stuck Into Realist Evaluation. So for now, thank you for listening. I really do appreciate your time. Hopefully you are starting to see how incredible realist evaluation can be, and also how useful it can be in almost every single situation, especially within our contexts. And as always, I am happy to have any discussion with anyone, so please watch this space for the next workshop about getting stuck in. And also, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.